Hello everybody and happy 4th of July. Today I'm going to be caking up 3 mini cakes, and without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is make the batter for all of my cakes. So the recipe I'm using is by How to Cake It by Yolanda Galp. And she is the one who actually got me interested in baking, and this is just a wonderful recipe, and it's really stable, it's really easy to work with. But if you are vegan, I also have a really great recipe for you guys too. So you can use any type of cake you want, but these are the 2 that I recommend. So after that's done, the first thing I'm going to do is to divide my cake batter into 2 separate bowls. And since this is a 4th of July cake, I'm going to color one blue and the other one red. So after I've dyed my batter, the first thing I'm going to do is fill up my 4-inch cake pan. So to do this, I'm just alternating between blue and red scoops, and I'm trying to just place them side by side and not let them mix too much, even though I know that they will mix a bit more in the oven. And we just want to get a really pretty marbled look when we cut into the cake. After that's done, I'm just filling a red ramekin with red batter and a blue ramekin with blue batter, and creating 2 little smudges on the side. So after letting the cakes bake and cool completely, this is what they look like. They look pretty good from the outside, but we really don't know what's going to happen until we cut into them. But before that, I'm just going to put them in plastic bags and leave them in the fridge overnight, and that way they'll firm up even more before we start decorating with them. This step is completely optional, but I just find it's easier to work with this way. Okay, so one day has passed, and I will say that I've placed cakes in the fridge before, but I usually take them out once before I do that, and this time I didn't, and I would definitely recommend taking it out first because it's a bit easier to get out of the pan, and I did end up scraping the sides a little bit as I was getting it out right now. But it's completely fine because we're going to cut off the sides anyway for this cake, so it is not a problem. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut the hump off the cake, and then I'm going to take off the sides as I said earlier, and after that I'm going to cut the cake into 2 halves. And to do this I'm using a ruler and a knife, and that's just the way that I find easiest to cut the cake, is to use the ruler to make tons of little indents all across the cake and use a slightly larger knife to connect them. And that's a really easy way to just cut any cake in half or into thirds or whatever you need. Once I'm done with that, I'm just going to simple syrup both of my cake layers, and now it's time for toppings and fillings. And the first thing I want to focus on is buttercream. So since this is a 4th of July cake, I wanted to make the buttercream as white as possible, and there's 3 main ways to do that. The first one is to add white food coloring, and you can find that at most craft stores, but I didn't have any of it right now. And the second one is to use a part shortening, part buttercream, and shortening is really white, but it does have a slightly different flavor, so that's why I didn't want to use that either. And the last way is just to whip the butter up a lot, and that's what I tried doing, and I didn't get it super white, but it still worked for me. Okay, so the second thing I'm going to make is a small candy melt decoration that I want to put on top of the cake. And candy melts are like white chocolate, but they're just a bit easier to work with, and I just spread a really thin layer out on a piece of parchment paper using an offset spatula, and then I cut an indent of a circle that's about the same size of my cake, so that once the candy melts are dry, they're really easy to just pop out later. Then I'm going to color a few of the candy melts red and a few of them blue and put them in piping bags and just cut the tip off really tiny and make kind of like random lines all across the little circle that I made. And that's just going to give it kind of an abstract look, and it should look pretty cool once we pop that circle out. Okay, so the third thing I'm going to make is whipped cream. And making whipped cream is super easy. It's just whipping up heavy whipping cream until it gets pretty stiff and adding some powdered sugar. And to kind of just bump it up, I'm going to be putting it in a piping bag that I've added little specks of food coloring to at the end. And that way when we pipe the heavy whipping cream out, it's going to have a really fun look on the edge of it. So the 4th and final thing I'm going to make is white chocolate ganache, and once again I'm using compound chocolate here just because the color is more white than normal white chocolate, and ganache is just heavy whipping cream and chocolate, and I used a 4:1 ratio of compound chocolate to heavy whipping cream to make it, and I just heated up the heavy whipping cream in the microwave and poured it over the compound chocolate, let it sit for a minute, and if it's not completely melted you can put it back in the microwave for 15-second increments until it is. So now that we're done with all that prep work, it's finally time to decorate. So the first thing I'm going to do is pipe a thick layer of buttercream between both of my cake layers. And then I'm going to place that abstract candy melt decoration that we made earlier on top of the cake. And you can see how it has a really nice and fun look to it. After that, I'm going to pipe a ring of heavy whipping cream around that decoration, and the little specks of food coloring in the piping bag really do make it pop a lot more. After that, we're just going to add a few sprinkles on top of that ring, and then we're going to use the white chocolate ganache that we made earlier in a piping bag to add drips all around the cake. So it's kind of like a drip cake with buttercream, and it just looks really cool. So now we're done with that, but we still have 2 other mini cakes left. And the first thing I'm going to do is cut the hump off of both of them and cut them both into 2 layers. And they're so tiny that I don't really have to use any ruler or anything, I can just eyeball it. After that, I'm going to simple syrup both of the cakes just to keep them moist like I did the first cake. So first, let's work with the blue cake. So for this cake, I'm going to spread a ton of buttercream frosting between the 2 layers, and then I'm going to cover the entire cake with buttercream frosting. And it looks a bit messy right now, but then I'm just going to add sprinkles all over the sides, and that's just going to fix everything up. As a final touch, I'm using a few of the shards that we got from the little decoration that we made earlier, and I'm just adding them on top of the cake to just bump it up a bit. So last but not least, we have our red cake, and for this cake I dyed some of my buttercream frosting blue, and I covered the entire cake with white chocolate ganache. And once that's a bit dry and a bit hard to the touch, I'm just going to use the same thing I did on the candy melt decoration, but I'm going to do that over the entire cake. And just like that, we're done with our 3 mini cakes. I'm honestly really happy with how these turned out, and let me know in the comments below what you think about them. And I decided to do mini cakes this 4th of July just because I know most of us are going to be stuck at home and we're not going to be going out and meeting our friends. But I hope this video inspires you to make a cake or just do something special at home for 4th of July this year. And also, if you do decide to make a mini cake, I have a ton of extra tips in the video description, so be sure to check that out as well. If you like this video, please be sure to share it with your friends, and don't forget to keep smiling. Thank you!